to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. And in today's episode, we are going to discuss a little bit about a little bit about coaching in tennis, um, and then also talk about the the skills that players can build to help them whether a coach is present or not. So skills like self-reliance and personal responsibility and things of that nature that players that tend to be critical skills, more historically when maybe coaches weren't always present. And we could talk about sort of where this idea came from, but also, whether coaching becomes more widespread or not, at different levels of the game. These important skills that I think are very related to aspects of the mental game in terms of emotional management, in terms of the time that players take between points, in terms of formulating and adjusting a game plan, things of that nature. And this actually, the idea for this actually came about from an article that I was actually quoted in Forbes, which is titled "Is Off-Court Coaching a Necessary Support for Tennis Players?" And we can link to that in the show notes if people want to check out that article. But I think it's an interesting question of, first of all, about the coaching piece, about um, whether more on-court coaching is a net positive or not. Which we may dive into a bit here, but I think more so about some of these skills, some of those necessary skills for tennis players to have, so that when they're in different sorts of situations, when they are playing a 2.5 hour match, or when they are dealing with the ups and downs that are inevitable within the sport and within a match, that they feel equipped, that they feel ready to handle those sorts of moments. So Brian wanted to see sort of where, what direction you wanted to take things to get things started.
Well, I think the idea of coaching in tennis, or maybe just like, I think we should be careful about that, saying that the sport builds certain characteristics or builds character, because the sport is neutral on character building. And the reason I say that, and some people sometimes have a visceral reaction to that, saying, of course it builds this and that. But if that were true, then we would see zero cheating in the sport, or we'd see zero bad behavior.
Zero racket smashes.
Yeah. And especially whether junior club level, I mean, even to some extent at the pro level. So if tennis, the sport itself, built character, positive character, then none of that would happen. But it does. And so we have to understand that what does build positive character in the sport of tennis is the environment around the athlete. So if we have a well-designed and developed environment around the athlete in which we are intentionally wanting to build certain character traits, like the ones you named, independence, self-reliance, I'll throw in self-mastery in there, a lot of things, decision-making, learning how to play the game, respect, all of that stuff. That has to be part of the environment that we are training in. If those things are not important, then they won't be developed as much. You might, I think Jim Lair says this in his famous 16-second cure video, with respect to mental toughness. Some players might learn it on their own, but many do not. Hence the need for some intentional training here. So I think, with respect to the role of coaches, it's not just coaching tactics and technique, during a match. I don't think that's going to happen necessarily at the pro level. But it's a lot of what's going on around the player. Rafael Nadal recently retired, and everybody is really, and justifiably so, complimenting him on his character as a player. That didn't happen just because of tennis. That didn't just happen because of Rafa. That happened because of the environment around him, with his uncle, his family, the values and the virtues that they all promoted as Rafa grew up through the sport. And Rafa, like any, and I'm sure he would admit this, like any kid, was not perfect. He would have his, his tantrums, etc. But those were used as lessons to develop some of the things that we've been talking about. So the role of the coach, I think, in terms of tennis is perhaps bigger than we think when it comes to the development of positive character traits. It's not the sport that just automatically gives that to you. Someone has to be using the sport to teach that to you. And if we can find that environment, then great. We have a better chance of becoming a great player. We have a better chance of becoming a great person. And tennis is a wonderful place to practice all of this because we are, if you think about it, Josh, if you go sign up for a tournament, you're voluntarily entering a situation in which you're kind of like torturing yourself. Right? This is going to be a lot of adversity. You're going to feel nervous. You're going to be tough situations. Maybe you're tough opponents, whether it's their behavior or their game or whatever. You voluntarily signed up for that. So, what are you getting out of that? You're getting out of that some of these character traits that we want to develop and feel some personal satisfaction and some pride in your ability to handle those situations. So, that's a little bit maybe more broad on the whole topic of, what is putting on-court coaching a negative for pro tennis. I don't know, but I think this is a good place to start because everybody starts at the beginning. No one is born, rolls onto the court at 5 years old and is playing ATP or WTA matches.
No, it's absolutely true, and it's you see certain I guess certain sports or even certain instruments. You think about chess or violin or piano, where there are these prodigies, right? Where there are these prodigies who are maybe 6 years old or 10 years old, and wow, look at what they're doing. And you see that in tennis, where somebody may be considered a prodigy or certainly performing at a much higher level than the people around them. But tennis obviously is a sport where that coaching and that training needs to take place to get to to get to a certain level. It doesn't just you don't just develop it quickly from the time you start playing it. And I'm not saying anything that our listeners don't know here. It's it takes a long time. I think you brought up an interesting point, which I agree with, that tennis does not inherently lead to positive character traits, which I think is very true. It's not a net positive necessarily, and we see all sorts of stuff during tennis tournaments, right? We see tantrums, we see tears, we see fights, we see all sorts of stuff, which is pretty standard within different levels of tennis, right? Different levels of junior tournaments, of pro tournaments. We see all sorts of things in college matches, in terms of coaching, or sorry, in terms of cheating and arguments and things of that nature. And pro tennis, we see, all sorts of behavioral issues as well. So it's not the matter of, okay, just start playing tennis and this will lead you to this personal development necessarily. But I think that there are some unique aspects of tennis that have the potential within the right environment, as you said, but they have the potential to lead to, to personal growth in certain ways. And I think some of those aspects are the fact that tennis is a sport where you do have to be out there generally for a while, right? Yes, maybe there's a match that's 6-0, 6-0 that finishes in 30 or 40 minutes, and they're not out there for that long of a time, but oftentimes it's going to be somewhere upwards of an hour, up to maybe 3 hours or so. So it's one challenging aspect of the sport is that you have to sustain your focus, emotional control, self-belief, confidence over a long period of time. And these things can wane, and can be fragile at times. We've talked about confidence being one of those particularly fragile elements. So anyway, so you're out there for a long period of time, It's traditionally just been you out there. Yes, maybe there's times where there's coaches, right? College tennis comes to mind. Um, Types of pro tennis, where people have access to coaches, which it seems to be moving in that direction, where it's going to be more across the board. But I think because people are out there by themselves and do have to fend for themselves, it can lead to certain positive character traits and character development where a player does build the skill or can build the skill of, okay, I'm out here, nobody's here to save me, so I need to figure things out for myself. I need to fend for myself out here. I need to, I can learn, cause and effect of, okay, if I act in this way, then this is what happens. And if I act in this completely other way, then this is what happens, right? And, I think we see that in terms of how a player manages their emotions out there. Not to say that it's all choice, not to say that a player can just choose to always, just handle their emotions in the way that they want to. I think there's a lot of training and, mental training certainly that can go on behind the scenes that can help with that. But I think that the sport has the potential to help a player develop these sorts of traits because they have to, or at least historically they have had to. They have had to be out there by themselves over long periods of time against an opponent who's trying to beat them and try to figure things out and then suffer those consequences, whether or not they did handle their emotions, whether or not they did make the necessary adjustments, whether or not they did manage to play their game and go for their shots. You essentially in a certain way, you eat what you kill out there as a tennis player based on those decisions that you make. Where in, let's say, team sports, there's more of that constant support and coaching and obviously teamwork that takes place. Where tennis, in a lot of ways, is that ultimate individual sport where that player is really out there by themselves and has to figure things out for themselves.
Yeah. Again, I'm sort of on a mixed thing here, or of a mixed mind, because I think so. Like, let's look at the argument for why we shouldn't allow coaching. And I think you're hearing this from some of the pro players. It's like it's going to change things. It should be about how the players handle this themselves and being independent. So is the flip side that all of a sudden, if we introduce coaching at every level of the game, that people just become automatons and don't think at all, and they just execute what their coaches say? I think that that's not realistic. I don't. I don't think that's what's going to happen, and we don't see that in college tennis, at all. I mean, I'm sure Josh, in your college career, you've probably said something to a player. He or she goes out and plays the next point in a completely opposite way that you asked them to do. And this is because everybody's ultimate coach lives in their own head. And so when the point begins, that's generally the voice they're going to listen to, more so than the coach on the side of the court. So I'm not arguing that we should have coaching at every level. I think that it would be beneficial, though, to have more situations in which coaches are present to help train the voice in the head. So that, because really the best situation for a coach, Josh, is your player is winning and you just sit there
Uh-huh.
and say nothing because you've done your job before the match. Right? We had that episode on committing to a game plan. We've had lots of episodes in which we talk about preparing for matches. If you do a great job getting the player ready, you should just be sitting there. And that's it. Maybe saying, hey, good job. Keep it up. Keep playing your game, right? Really simple things. And to me, that's where most of this coaching stuff isn't gonna, like the encore, I don't think it's gonna change the game to a dramatic place, especially at the pro level, because there's so much work that's going on off the court. It's training the player to make the right decisions in the right moments. And then, yeah, you're maybe there just more for emotional support or whatever. And we're kind of getting that from the boxes as it is today. Um, but I do think the more we could work through the development of a player's journey on helping them coach themselves, teach them how to talk to themselves through certain situations, such that when it comes time to actually play a point, they know what they're doing. When they have to play a deuce no ad point, they know what they're doing. You shouldn't need to say at a certain point, okay, I want you to kick it out wide and hit to the open court. You've already done that work on the practice court. You could literally say, all right, deuce point play, or say nothing. Um, so that's where I get a little bit like I'm not sure like with the players who are coming out against this. I'm not really sure it's going to change the game that much. I still think most of the players still have to work on who they are, how they coach themselves in points off the court. But I would love to see more of that somehow factored into the way we develop players. And there, of course, is an economic issue with that. Not everybody can afford that kind of thing. Not every academy has the staff to offer that. Not every player goes to an academy that's growing up. They may go to live in some more rural area and they're just going to a club that has one pro and they're learning the game. So there are a lot of barriers to this happening. But I think ultimately, if you're a coach of a player, this might be an interesting engagement model that you work on with your player about, all right, how can I teach you to coach yourself through the match, or a parent, right? We want to build independence. We want to build self-reliance. We want to build courage on the court. We want to build this willingness to play your game and develop a game plan such that when you are on your own, you feel pretty comfortable doing that, or it becomes more of a learning process. So I don't know what your thoughts are, Josh, about will on-court coaching in pro tennis really be a huge difference maker, or is it more the off-court work that's important, or off the tournament court, right? It's on court, but it's practice court.
I think it's both. I mean, I do think that there are some impacts. I mean, I think going back to something that you said, right? That coaches, and I agree with this, that coaches should be helping players coach themselves essentially, right? So that when they're in different situations, right? It's a deuce point with no ad. Okay, that they know how they want to handle it. When an opponent makes a line call that they disagree with and they get frustrated or angry, how can they put that behind them? How can they make adjustments during a match? So I guess I would lean more in the direction of, okay, coaches ought to be working with players on these skills, and I think there's a lot more that can be done there oftentimes, where there's often a lot of emphasis on technique and tactics and things like that, and less emphasis on these sorts of things in terms of players. So I guess you could say the tennis IQ aspect of things, or players learning not just these elements of the sport, but really how to play and how to handle the multitude of situations that will come up for a player. Um, but I guess my question or my pushback to more widespread coaching is I think that it's important for coaches to be teaching these skills because it's necessary, because it's that necessary component in the sport right now. I think if everyone was growing up where you were playing in a 10 and under match and you had access to your coach on the bench with you, and then you played that 14 and 12 and under 14 and under match and you had access to your coach, and then you played higher level USTA tournaments and then maybe ITF tournaments in college, and then you go on and you play the pro level, and every step of the way you have access to those coaches. I could see the argument being made that maybe those skills that we're talking about of making adjustments, of handling the ups and downs, of handling all those situations that a player will find themselves in, maybe aren't so necessary for that coach to be teaching them, because maybe they can lean on that coach a little bit more in some of those moments. And then maybe that coach doesn't need to provide that sort of training or that sort of environment. So I think it's a tough situation. And you mentioned the haves and the have-nots, which I think, you know, we see at the pro level as well, where certain, maybe, I'm not talking pro level in terms of maybe top 50 or top 100 necessarily, but, let's say in lower levels of the professional game, the ITF circuit, for instance, the Challenger Tour, where not every player has the same sort of access, where some players have full-time coaches that travel with them and others don't. Sometimes players will share coaches. Sometimes players can't afford to bring coaches. You see the same thing at the elite junior level, where there's that disparity as well. And yeah, that I think that does potentially make things less fair for those who maybe don't have that same access or have maybe a part-time coach compared to a full-time coach. So I think it's a tough situation. I think the end goal here, regardless of how widespread coaching gets, is for players to be equipped with different skills, right? To be equipped with skills so that they can handle whatever a match throws at them, right? And I think this argument of tennis having the potential to make you a better person or to help you build character skills is because a tennis match can mirror other aspects of life, right? Those ups and downs, the fact that things aren't always fair, the fact that you're going to have, good days and bad days, all of these. I think there are a lot of aspects of the sport that do mirror other elements of life. So I think, yeah, if, I think, yeah, coaches and sports psychology professionals ought to help players feel like they are ready for any and everything that will happen out there. And then if there is more coaching, right? If a player is playing college tennis, players playing ITF tennis now with, the ability to have more coaching, then that's great. And then they can use that additional resource. I just am hesitant about the potential reliance on coaches that this being more widespread could lead to.
Yeah, it could possibly lead to that. And I think it's very hard for us to tell because that's probably like a more of a longitudinal study of players from ages 6 to 18, and nobody's really done that in this environment. And so it's everything we're saying is more speculation, but I think um, the whole goal of using tennis as a vehicle to develop positive character traits is, I think, is a worthwhile goal, and we want to just make sure that we're always keeping that in mind. And can we be constructing an environment that allows for that and that doesn't create sort of an over dependence on others? I mean, you could say to a certain degree that in the last 25 years, professional players, not all, but many, have an over reliance on talking to their box. That has nothing to do with on court coaching.
That's true.
And, and so, and we see this also from junior players. You go to any junior tournament, and I would say a significant number are looking up at their parents or their coach between points as if they need help. And in many of those situations, they can't get it, which can be good, can be bad. It depends. But we're starting to see that even at the pro level. I would say within the last 20, 25 years, 20-ish years at least, lots of players chirping with their box and communicating, where we didn't really see a lot of that, I want to say, prior to the year 2000, maybe 2003. I don't recall a lot of that. So, and maybe that's just how maybe parenting has changed in such a way in tennis that players are tending to look up at their coaches and parents in their boxes more so, and then that continues. Is that a trend that we could potentially change a little bit? And the players that I've worked with, I have generally a rule is that after you lose a point, you're not allowed to look at us.
I like that.
And if you win a point, great. You can, show fist pump to us. We're all for that. But if you lose a point, you got to figure it out. Don't be yelling at us or asking us or raising your hands like what's going on. You need to figure that part out because that's going to be normal, and it's a good opportunity to talk about the role of points and mistakes, and like you said, Josh, figuring things out. If you want to celebrate with us, great, but don't ask us for help because we can't help you. You're out there on your own. So I mean, I think that's another trend that we're seeing, and maybe that could also be addressed a little bit more at the junior level. And I do hear more coaches talking about that when I talk to coaches in the in this area about their players and helping them with a lot of these skills. So I think overall we're in agreement, Josh, that tennis is a great place to train these types of character traits. Whether or not on-court coaching at the pro level really has an impact on that, I don't know. Obviously, I think all of the stuff that happens prior to one becoming a pro is very formative, and it's in that arena that a lot of this will take place. And if you're starting as an adult, then you just want to make sure you're working with a coach who understands this part of the game, and that even as someone who starts an adult, you have a long career in tennis, a long journey to becoming a great player. And we want it to be a healthy journey and one in which you're learning these character traits through tennis, that you are learning to master yourself and your own emotions, and learning to focus and understand that people will cheat, people will act badly. It's the nature of the world, and it gets reflected in tennis, and it's a great opportunity to practice dealing with such people.
I think that's all true. Going back to one point from earlier about players who will lose a point and then look up at their parent or their coach who's watching, and either get mad at them, or maybe put their hands up in the air, almost like, why is this happening, when they miss a shot, things like that. I think, yeah, I think there has been an increase in that, and I think a lot of that is, I don't think that's due to changes in coaching at the pro level. I think it's due to maybe specific examples of pro players who do the exact same, who engage with their parent or coach or partner in the exact same way during a match. And we could probably think of some notable examples, not that we need to call players out or anything like that. But, I think we've seen a more widespread, I think it's been more widespread that players will, yeah, yell at their boxes, ask for more support, rather than being able to really dig in, really try to be a problem solver, which I think is again, in an ideal world, one of those main skills that a tennis player can develop through the trials and tribulations of the sport, where you are traditionally out there by yourself. Again, I don't, yeah. So, yeah, I think when a player is yelling at their coach or parent, or at their box at the pro level, that they're leaning away from that self-reliance. And I guess I would just hope, sort of regardless of the direction that coaching goes in, that players are able to still dig in and still, really just try to accept the situation, try to problem solve. And that's, what I tell players that I work with, and I think you do the same, Brian, and I think we both help them develop different skills to do that, to problem solve, to, make adjustments if necessary, to try to do their best to manage a match that's in front of them. And I don't necessarily, yeah, I don't necessarily foresee encore coaching changing that, but I think that's the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to have players who and help players get to that point where they can do that, where they can manage whatever is thrown at them in a match. And I think if players have, can get to that point, first of all, that's a lot of confidence. There's a lot of confidence that comes with that, feeling equipped, feeling ready to handle whatever might happen out there, right? Your opponent makes a couple bad line calls in a row. The ball hits off the let cord onto your side of the court. your shots start to break down. All sorts of things that can and will happen out there if you play enough tennis. But a player can get to that point through training. It doesn't just, again, they're not just born into, having these sorts of skills, but a player can, have that goal of, you know what? That's okay. That's all part of it. And I'm accepting that. I'm ready to problem solve. I'm ready to tackle that head on rather than backing away from that, rather than getting mad at the situation, rather than looking up to to a parent or coach for help in those situations, but really trying to accept it and embrace that situation head on as much as possible.
So the trend of professional tennis maybe taking on more and more coaching, very interesting. Um, the consequences, implications of that are obviously unknown. But, I think we're trying to hone in on that tennis traditionally has been a great place when in the right environment to work on aspects of your character and being independent out there. And I think we always want that to be a part of the game. And I'm sure it always will be. Even in team sports, if you think about it, Josh, how many, maybe this is less so today, but certainly in many environments, kids play the sport without coaches around. They go to a playground, they play basketball. There's no coach there.
Yep.
Kids, hopefully in tennis can also be encouraged to, communicate with their friends, set up a match, and just go play and do it for fun. And that's a great place. And hopefully we never lose that aspect of tennis. So I think it's a really interesting conversation. Would love to hear from, our listeners in terms of like what they think on this topic. There's no real definitive answers, but I think tennis is a unique sport in the way it's structured and can be great when, again, in the right environment for developing positive character traits. So any last thoughts, Josh?
No, honestly, no. I think we've covered it. Again, we would love to hear from you. Whenever we get emails from listeners with questions or feedback, or episode ideas, I think we always love to see those, and yeah, it's just always interesting to hear if people have had their own experiences with maybe coaches on the court or not coaches on the court, or maybe your thoughts about that and what direction that could lead to, but also just about other things that we talk about on this show. So we always love to hear from people, and I think it can maybe open our eyes to other ways of thinking about these topics as well.
Well, that's our show for today. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes, as Josh mentioned. Please send us your feedback and questions to tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube. And you can also check us out on Instagram. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership, where you can learn about the benefits of being part of the Tennis IQ podcast community. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.